An egg that wouldn't break, yet cracked a case wide open. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Umbra. Tell me where you're tuning in from. I love seeing this community grow. Your comments truly make these mysteries come alive. Let's begin. If you want to disturb the sanctity of Nero Wolfe's brownstone, you don't need dynamite, subpoenas, or a brass band. You need one egg that refuses to break. At 8:30, I was in the kitchen with Fritz, who was whisking his conscience into a hollandaise. He'd spent 10 minutes explaining to me why lemon must meet butter like a gentleman meeting a lady. No rushing, no shouting, no curdling. For my part, I had a modest ambition to eat it. Then the phone rang on the back wall, and while Fritz answered, I did him a favor. I reached for the new carton of eggs that had arrived with the milk. The first egg gave up the ghost properly against the rim of the copper bowl. The second cracked like a polite door knock. The third didn't want to come out and needed persuasion. The fourth was a headline. I tapped it. Nothing. I rapped it harder. The shell took it like a bank vault. I rolled it against the rim and pushed. The rim lost. By the time Fritz said, yeah, good morning, into the phone, I had a hand wrapped in a dish towel and an egg that might as well have been granite in the other. Fritz, I said, we have a stubborn citizen. He turned, took one look and crossed himself. That's not a routine move for Fritz Brenner. He took the egg, lifted it to his ear, and listened. I didn't ask what he expected to hear. Pleas for mercy. He set it on the cutting board, braced himself, and brought down the heel of his palm. If there was a crack, it was in his opinion of modern agriculture. Archie, he breathed, it is wrong. It's also late, I said. Mr. Wolfe will want breakfast. Fritz took the egg in both hands as if it might explode in shame. No one tampers with my eggs. I admire the sentiment, I told him. It's the verb that worries me. The phone was still live. I picked it up. A woman's voice, calm and close, said, Is this Nero Wolfe's residence? I told her it was, and she told me her name was Mina Collier, and that she needed a 10 o'clock appointment. I told her 10 was booked by Orchids, and suggested 11:30. She hesitated, then said, Noon then. Please tell Mr. Wolfe this is not about murder. It's about something more delicate. That will thrill him, I said. We specialize in delicate. When I hung up, Fritz was glaring at the egg as if it had insulted his mother. He tried a small hammer from the tool drawer, the one he uses to tap sugar cages. The egg took the blow and handed it back. He fetched a nail and looked at me. No, I said. The district attorney would never understand. We compromised with a pin. Fritz pressed slowly, steadily till the pin bowed and the egg did not. Etch one for the egg. At 9:55 I took Wolfe his beer in the morning mail. He was in the office chair, settled like a mountain, his lips making an invisible line and his eyes at half-mast, the professional expression of a man who had spent 2 hours coddling orchids and now had to deal with humanity. I put the tall glass where it belonged and the letters to his right. He reached without looking and found the glass with the accuracy of a heron finding trout. Confound it, he said after a swallow. I smell lemon. Hollandaise in jeopardy, I reported. One egg refuses to surrender. We've tried persuasion, negotiation, and light assault. His eyelids rose a degree. Refuses to break. That's the word. It's as if someone taught it calculus and self-defense. Wolfe plucked a letter, slit it, scanned, and set it aside. You're indulging your facility for farce. Fritz wanted me to bring the egg to you, but I argued, you're a detective, not a smith. Pfui. He reached for the next envelope and paused. It was small, cream, addressed in a neat, slanted hand. Mr. Nero Wolfe, with our street and number. I'd noticed it among the bills and circulars and saved it for last because you don't put dessert under soup. He slid the blade under the flap and drew out a folded note. He read. He didn't say, "Ha." He didn't twitch. He didn't even blink. He read it twice, folded it again, and held it up between two fingers. Archie. I took it. The paper was heavy and smelled faintly of something dry and expensive. The message, "If it won't break, neither will I." Noon. M. I raised a brow. We have a poet. We have an imbecile, he said, who presumes my willingness to decode coyness. Emp is an affectation. Mina? Morgan? Mischief? Pfui. Maybe it's the egg talking, I said. If it won't break, neither will I. He scowled at the phrase as if it were a lima bean. What did you arrange for noon? A Miss or Ms. Mina Collier, not a murder, something delicate. She was insistent about noon. He closed his eyes. I waited while he chased a thought into a corner and looked at its whiskers. When he opened them, he said, "Bring the egg." Into the office? Into the office, he said, and set the note at the corner of his blotter as if it were contaminable. I went to the kitchen. Fritz had tried the refrigerator, then the warm water trick, then moral persuasion. The egg sat on the board, gleaming like an answer that refuses to fit the question. In the office, I said. Fritz held it out, and I hesitated. I've carried jewels and affidavits and the hopes of disappointed heiresses, but this was my first armored ovum. It was heavier than it should have been. Not a rock, still the weight of an egg, but there was a density to it my fingers didn't like. Wolfe took it gingerly. His hands are big and precise, and usually his fingers don't go near anything with grease in its lineage. But he set the egg on the desk pad and rolled it an inch. He sniffed. He tapped the shell with a pen. It's raw, he said. And I told him that if he was about to suggest we blow it and save the whites, Fritz would kiss him on the mouth. At noon, he said, we will ask Miss Collier what impels her to insult us by involving our kitchen. Us? My kitchen is my house, and the kitchen is the heart of the house, he said. A man who tampers with the heart is either a fool or an enemy. I'll send out for a cardiologist, I said. At 11:55, Fritz served a delayed breakfast that qualified as lunch with a college education. He'd found an alternate carton and had the hollandaise glistening like goodwill. Wolfe ate as if the egg on his desk were a witness to his appetite and should take notes. I was finishing a second cup of coffee when the bell rang. The woman who entered at noon wore a navy suit and a look that said she'd given up on men listening without charging by the hour. She was mid-30s, compact, dark hair scraped back like she'd done it in an elevator, and she carried a small insulated bag with the reverence of a nurse with a donor organ. When I told her my name, she did the quick inventory people do when they realize I'm not the fat one, and then nodded. I took her to the office. Wolfe didn't rise. Wolfe never rises. He inclined his head a quarter-inch and said, Miss Collier, your business? She sat on the red leather chair like it might eject her. Thank you for seeing me. I know your policies. You do not know them, Wolfe said. You have inferred a few from gossip, your message. He indicated the note with his eyes. She blinked. I didn't send a note. He let that sit. What impels your request? She glanced at the egg on his desk and winced. You found one. It found us, I said. Arrived with the milk. She sighed through her nose. Then I was right. Someone's making a point. State it, Wolfe said. My employer manufactures food coatings. She set the insulated bag on her lap and kept a hand on it. At Henway Labs, we've developed a clear mineral lattice that can be applied to fragile foods to prevent breakage during shipping. It's safe, calcium derivatives, and invisible. The process, if misused, could turn a raw egg into something a prankster would call a miracle and a cook would call a nightmare. Henway, Wolfe repeated, tonelessly, as if the syllables had dirt on them. It's a stupid name, she admitted, but it's profitable. 2 weeks ago, someone began placing samples. we found reinforced eggs in a competitor's carton at a trade breakfast. A food blogger opened one on camera and made jokes for 3 minutes. Yesterday, a crate of coated eggs was sent to the city health department with an anonymous letter claiming we're releasing adulterants. We're not. But if the narrative sticks, we lose everything. And this morning, I said, our kitchen got a party favor. She nodded. I suspected we might. Whoever's doing this knows your reputation and your habits. They want to provoke. Wolfe had been watching her the way a botanist watches a leaf for tremor. He closed his eyes now and let his head settle into the chair. Why, he asked, do you believe the source is within your circle? She licked her lip. Because the lattice formula is internal, and because of the note I received last night, also from M. It said, when the shell holds, the lies crack, noon. No return address. I looked at Wolfe. He did not return the look. He said, who is M? That's the problem, she said. In my department alone, I have a Malik, a May, a Mel, and a Mr. Merriweather who insists on initials. But if I name them, I accuse them. I came here because you don't mind naming people. You came here, Wolfe said, because someone touched my kitchen. The rest is embroidery. Ms. Collier, you will, in 10 minutes, give Mr. Goodwin the names of those who could have made, moved, or messaged in this manner. You will add to that list any person who benefits from public humiliation of your employer. You will remain here while he telephones. Archie will fetch Saul Panzer to make arrangements. You'll take the case? She asked. I will consider, he said, avenging the egg. He lifted the unbroken offender between thumb and forefinger and set it gently back on the desk pad. And perhaps, he added, almost to himself, testing a hypothesis. I asked, what hypothesis? He shut his eyes. That whoever sent this wanted me to decline. He opened them again and let the lids hang heavy. Archie. Names. Wolfe had his eyes closed, which didn't fool me. That was his way of turning the mental machinery loose while pretending to nap. I sat across from him, my notebook open, my pencil tapping a polite rhythm. Mina Collier was still perched on the edge of the red chair, gripping her bag as if it contained her reputation, which it probably did. When Wolfe stays silent for more than 20 seconds, you either leave or prepare to take dictation. I waited for the third option, the slow, almost indulgent opening of his eyes. It came right on time. Archie, he said, call Saul. I dialed. Saul Panzer answered on the second ring. Wolfe gave the instructions. Saul was to meet Ms. Collier at Henway Labs that afternoon under the guise of a logistics consultant to observe her department discreetly. He was to report any peculiarities, especially signs that a sample had been planted or tampered with. Saul understands discretion, Wolfe concluded, and hung up before Saul could bless him for the opportunity. Mina looked between us like someone who had just realized she'd signed up for a chess match instead of therapy. What exactly are you looking for, Mr. Wolfe? He folded his hands over his stomach, a gesture that looked restful but wasn't. The character of your predicament. Whoever sent this egg is either seeking amusement or destruction. The distinction matters. The former is frivolous. The latter is formidable. I intend to learn which. Amusement, she echoed. You mean a prank? An expensive one, I put in. You don't mail reinforced eggs around the city for kicks unless you've got a real grudge or a laboratory budget. Her mouth tightened. My company isn't the kind that breeds loyalty. It breeds fear. Our founder, Mr. Lang Henway, has a policy. Perfection is the only security. That means everyone's replaceable. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. And you, Ms. Collier, how secure are you? I developed part of the stabilizing process. That makes me valuable, until someone can replicate my work. Wolfe nodded, eyes half closed again. And who, in your opinion, might wish to see you cracked? She hesitated, then sighed. Malik Patel. head of logistics. He thinks I discredited his safety tests. May Drury, public relations. She despises my technical vocabulary and calls me an autist behind my back. Mel Haskins, our competitor's nephew, brought in for fresh ideas. And Merriweather, our in-house chemist. Genius, but unstable. That's 4, I said, jotting them down. A nice round suspect set. Do they all have access to your formula? Yes. It's stored on our internal drive. Password protected, but the passwords rotate. I whistled softly. So, 4 suspects, 4 motives, and an egg that wouldn't break. Sounds like our breakfast menu. She gave a faint, tired smile. Wolfe didn't. You may go, Miss Collier, he said. Archie will escort you. Expect a call from Mr. Panzer this evening. Do not discuss this visit with anyone. She rose. And if the press comes to me again, tell them you are considering a religious vocation, Wolfe said. She blinked, realized he was serious in his own perverse way, and managed to quiet, Thank you. When she left, I shut the door and turned. Wolfe's eyes were still on the egg, gleaming under the lamplight like it was smirking. You're not taking this as a business case, I said. He lifted an eyebrow. No, you're taking it personal. He breathed through his nose. When someone intrudes upon my domestic sanctuary, the distinction between personal and professional dissolves. I grinned. That's poetic for you. He ignored it. You will go to Henway Labs this afternoon. Do not duplicate Mr. Panzer's work. You will speak to each of the 4, casually, and report their temperaments. A man's manner under strain often reveals more than his words. Got it. Any preference for my cover story? You will pose as a representative from the State Supply Commission, investigating laboratory waste protocols. Charming. Nothing makes friends faster than government inspection. He waved a hand. You will manage. By 2 o'clock, I was standing in the marble lobby of Henway Labs, where ambition had been sanitized into a corporate fragrance. Mina's badge got me past reception. The hallways were glass-walled and silent except for the hum of refrigeration units and the shuffle of lab coats. She introduced me to the suspects one by one. Malik Patel, neat as a spreadsheet, with fingers that kept twitching toward his tablet. May Drury, sharp smile, sharper heels, the kind of woman who measured success by how much you flinched. Mel Haskins, young and slippery, with the charm of someone who's never failed publicly. And Merriweather, round, distracted, muttering equations to himself like prayers. I asked harmless questions about safety waste and storage, watched their eyes, noted the tension. Malik deflected everything with numbers. May answered every question by questioning me. Mel joked too much, laughed too loud, and smelled faintly of cologne that was trying too hard. Merriweather barely registered my existence until I asked about calcium derivatives. Then his eyes snapped into focus, and for the first time he smiled, thin and cold. Fascinating, he murmured. You'd be surprised how much structure you can hide in something as fragile as an egg. I told him I believed it and took the hint to leave. By dusk, I was back at the brownstone. Wolfe was in his chair, book open, the egg still sitting untouched on his desk like a centerpiece. I gave him the rundown. He listened, fingers steepled. When I finished, he said, a pattern emerges. One of these people has attempted to mock both science and order. You mean the egg prank? No, he said softly. The audacity of sending it here. It is a message meant for me. I blinked. For you. Who else in New York, he asked, would recognize that something so simple is meant to defy fracture? I didn't have an answer. Wolfe took a slow breath, opened his eyes fully, and looked at the egg. Archie, he said, tomorrow morning I will crack it. At 10 the next morning, I found Nero Wolfe already in the office, which meant he'd skipped the orchids. That's how you know something's serious, When Wolfe sacrifices a session with his plants, somebody's about to regret their choices in life. The egg sat on his desk like a paperweight from a mad scientist's catalogue. Fritz had retreated to the kitchen, claiming divine objection to being present during scientific vandalism. Wolfe was leaning forward slightly, a position he reserves for high crimes against reason. In front of him lay a folded towel, a magnifying lens, and one of his mother's silver dessert spoons. That spoon had outlasted 2 world wars and at least a dozen bribes from collectors, so whatever happened next was practically ceremonial. "Archie," he said, "note the time." "It's 10:30, I said, "in case the egg needs a death certificate." He grunted. "We shall see whether death applies to something that was never alive." He adjusted the lens, peered at the egg, and muttered, "Remarkable. I can think of stronger words." "The coating," he said, "is thin, microscopic, yet resilient. Observe the surface. The shell is sealed not with wax, but a crystallized compound. Whoever applied it did so uniformly, suggesting machinery rather than handwork. Yet this," he paused, frowning, "this is not Henway's process." I raised a brow. "You can tell that by smell?" "By sense," he corrected. "Henway's lattice, as described in their patent filings, uses a boron-calcium derivative. This compound contains something else, magnesium perhaps, or an unapproved stabilizer." Foolish. I was halfway to asking how a man who hated laboratories knew so much about their contents when the doorbell rang. Wolfe's eyes flicked toward the hall. "That will be Mr. Panzer." I went to answer. Saul came in looking like he'd already solved 3 crimes on the way. He dropped his hat on the rack and joined us in the office. "Morning, Wolfe. Archie." He nodded toward the egg. "You're keeping it as evidence or a pet?" "Neither," Wolfe said. "Your report." Saul sat. I shadowed Ms. Collier's department until closing. Nobody touched her station. No one acted spooked except Malik Patel. He kept deleting something from his screen every time someone walked by. I ran a quiet check afterward. He's been logging long after-hours sessions from his terminal. "Stolen data?" I asked. "Could be. Or he's covering someone else's tracks." Saul leaned back. "There's tension in that lab. Half of them think someone's framing Mina. The other half thinks she's the one doing the framing." "That," Wolfe said, "is convenient for the guilty." Saul smirked. "I thought you'd say that." Before Wolfe could ask the next question, the phone rang. I picked it up. It was Mina Collier, her voice unsteady. "Mr. Goodwin, something's happened. You'd better come to the lab, now." I relayed the message. Wolfe scowled. "Go. Take Mr. Panzer. I will not leave the egg unattended." I gave the egg a salute and headed out. At Henway Labs, the atmosphere was less corporate and more crime scene. 2 security guards hovered outside Mina's department door, and inside, the tension you could cut with a pipette. Mina stood near a long counter, pale as the walls. "It was Merriweather," she whispered when she saw us. He's gone." I blinked. "Gone?" She pointed to the far end of the lab. A work table sat under a vent hood, and on it, a small open case. Empty vials, a smashed glass slide, and a sticky gray residue shimmered faintly on the metal surface. "Left that note," she said, handing me a scrap of paper. The note read, "The shell held too long. Now it must break." "Suicide?" I asked. "Or escape," she said. "No one saw him leave. But the compound on that table, if he inhaled it raw." Saul moved closer, studying the residue. "Whatever it was, it crystallized fast. Toxic, maybe. We'll get the sample analyzed." I took a breath, surveying the faces around us. Malik Patel was there, face tight and watchful. May Drury stood by the door, lips pressed thin. Mel Haskins kept glancing at Mina like he wanted to say something but didn't dare. "You all saw him this morning?" I asked. Malik nodded. He came in early. Said he had an experiment to finish. I thought nothing of it. And you, Miss Drury? Her tone could have cut glass. I don't involve myself with the chemists. They live in their own world. Mel laughed, nervous. If he's dead, he didn't seem like it yesterday. He was joking about indestructible breakfast. That last word snagged something in my head. Breakfast? Yeah, Mel said. He brought an egg from home, said he'd finally perfected it. Saul and I exchanged a look. Archie, he murmured. I nodded. The egg wolf has. Mina's eyes widened. You mean that one? Looks like your missing formula wasn't the only thing coated, I said. We sealed the note, the residue, and Merriweather's workstation for evidence, then drove back to the brownstone. Wolfe hadn't moved. The egg was still there, gleaming under the desk lamp like it had been waiting for applause. Merriweather, Wolfe said before I opened my mouth. I heard it in your expression. He's missing, I said. And he left a note. The shell held too long. Now it must break. Wolfe nodded once, slow. Trite but telling. He was no fool. If he vanished, it was deliberate. Maybe he coated himself with calcium, I said. He's invincible now. Archie. His tone could have iced coffee. We are no longer dealing with mischief. Someone has elevated parody into peril. He took the spoon and held it above the egg. For the first time that morning, I saw something close to excitement in his eyes. Watch closely, he said. He struck the shell, not hard, but enough to split any ordinary egg. Nothing. He struck again, firmer. Still nothing. Then, with surgical precision, he pressed the tip of the spoon into the shell's center. A fine line appeared, silver against white, and widened just enough to release a faint hiss. Wolfe leaned closer, inhaled once, and recoiled. Archie, he said quietly, open the windows. Now. I didn't ask why. When Nero Wolfe's nose twitches, you move fast. By the time I'd thrown the sashes wide, he had covered the egg with the towel. The odor, he muttered, is not organic. It is chemical and weaponized. I froze halfway across the room. You mean poison? I mean, he said grimly, this case is no longer about sabotage. It's about murder. When Wolfe tells you to open a window, you don't argue. You act. I had all four wide before he'd finished covering the egg, and the October air came barreling in like a street protest against whatever was in that shell. Fritz, drawn by the commotion, appeared in the doorway and took one look at the towel on Wolfe's desk before deciding the hallway was safer. For a minute, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the city outside. Then Wolfe spoke, his voice measured but colder than the air. It is methylcyanate, he said, or something that mimics it. Lethal in concentration. Someone intended that egg to be a trap. I stared at the towel as if it might start hissing again. So, we weren't supposed to crack it. Just keep it around until it killed us slowly. Precisely. The reaction required exposure. It was coated not merely to resist force, but to delay it. Ingenious and contemptible. He reached for his handkerchief, dabbed his forehead once, and then sat back, closing his eyes for a long, heavy moment. I could tell he wasn't just thinking chemistry. He was thinking malice. Merriweather's note, he said finally, was a signal. The shell held too long. He was warning someone, or us, that containment had ended. I sat on the edge of my desk. Then he wasn't the one who made the poison? Uncertain, Wolfe said. But if he was, he regretted it. Otherwise he'd not have disappeared. Poisoners enjoy the aftermath. They do not flee it. I called Saul, who was still at the lab. When he heard toxic gas, he stopped breathing into the receiver long enough to say, I'll get the ventilation checked and the police off our backs. Don't touch anything till I send a man. That was Saul, efficient and calm, even when the topic was airborne murder. When I hung up, Wolfe was still staring at the covered shape on his desk. "Archie," he said, "I have changed my mind." "About what?" "About this being a professional rivalry." He opened his eyes. "This is not business sabotage. It is personal, meticulously, intimately personal. The choice of weapon is theatrical. Whoever devised this wished to insult me, to turn intellect into vulnerability. A mind like that does not emerge from the street. It comes from proximity." "You're saying one of Mina Collier's crowd decided you'd make a nice test subject?" He nodded slowly. "Or one of her superiors. Perhaps Mr. Henway himself. I need to understand how the formula left their possession and why it arrived here. Bring Ms. Collier." I phoned her. She arrived an hour later, visibly shaken and thinner around the edges. She carried a sealed envelope and a look that could curdle milk. "I heard from Saul," she said as I took her coat. "He told me what happened." "God, Mr. Wolfe, if I'd known—" "You did not," Wolfe interrupted. "So you are absolved. Of intent. But perhaps not of negligence." That one hit home. Her hands clenched around the envelope. "I found something in my locker after I left yesterday," she said. "I don't know who put it there." I took the envelope and laid it before Wolfe. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, grainy, but unmistakable. Merriweather, standing outside a building that wasn't Henway Labs. The sign behind him read, "Grayson Industrial Chemicals." On the back, someone had written in neat block letters, "The source is never the same twice." Wolfe examined it in silence. Then, softly, "Archie, look up Grayson Industrial." While I phoned Lon Cohen at the Gazette for a quick background check, Mina sat rigid. Wolfe questioned her in that smooth, cutting way of his that made confessions feel like polite conversation. "How long," he asked, "had Merriweather been in contact with Grayson?" "I didn't know he was," she said. "He never mentioned it. But last month he started coming in late, said he was testing materials off-site. Was that approved?" "No." I hung up the phone. "Got it. Grayson's a private contractor for industrial solvents. Rumor says they've been trying to undercut Henway's patents for years." "Of course," Wolfe murmured. "A rival firm with the same objectives, but none of the ethics. If Merriweather crossed from one to the other, he was carrying secrets, and they were dangerous enough to merit silencing him." Mina's voice trembled. "You mean they killed him?" "Not yet confirmed," Wolfe said. "But they have demonstrated capability. They've also demonstrated arrogance by sending me a specimen." She looked at him, confused. "But why involve you?" I leaned against the desk. "Because Wolfe doesn't just solve crimes. He embarrasses the people who commit them. Someone wanted to make sure that if he got close, he'd inhale a lesson." That earned me a glare from Wolfe, but no denial. He turned to Mina. "You will not return to Henway today. You will, however, telephone Mr. Henway and request a private conversation tomorrow at his residence. Inform him that Nero Wolfe requires it. I wish to discuss the ethical standards of his laboratory." Her eyebrows shot up. "He'll never agree." "He will," Wolfe said, "because he fears exposure more than discomfort. And you, Ms. Collier, will ensure he understands that I already possess the evidence." She hesitated, then nodded. After she left, Wolfe leaned back and shut his eyes again. "Archie, the pieces are aligning. Merriweather's formula was stolen, altered, and weaponized. Someone at Grayson wanted Henway destroyed, but also wanted me discredited. They failed on both counts." "Maybe," I said. "But if Merriweather's alive, he's either running or hiding." "Find him," Wolfe said simply, "and take Mr. Panzer with you. If the trail grows cold, I will warm it." "Where do we start?" "With Grayson Industrial," he said. "There is a smell about them. Chemical, yes, but also moral. It will not be improved by fresh air." I nodded, headed for the door, and paused long enough to glance at the towel still covering the egg. "What about that?" he exhaled. Dispose of it carefully, and Archie, no breakfast eggs for the foreseeable future." "Understood," I said. "We'll try pancakes. Less fatal." He didn't smile. But when I closed the door behind me, I could feel his mind still turning, slow, immense, and unbreakable as the egg that started it all. By the time Saul and I reached Grayson Industrial, the sun had lost its patience. It was hanging low and mean, bouncing off the concrete like it had somewhere better to be. The building looked as friendly as a tax audit. Gray slabs, tinted glass, and a reception desk that could double as a fortress. If there were secrets inside, they'd built the walls thick enough to muffle the screams. Saul parked across the street, his expression unreadable under the brim of his hat. "We're not getting in without an excuse," he said. "You want official or charming?" "Let's start charming," I said. "If that fails, we can try official with your usual charm." Inside, the lobby smelled of ozone and disinfectant. A receptionist with the warmth of a tombstone gave us a look that suggested we were interrupting something sacred. I gave her my brightest grin. "Archie Goodwin, State Inspection Division. This is Mr. Panzer. We're following up on cross-company compliance for chemical safety standards." That last phrase always gets a reaction. Hers was to freeze completely, then blink like someone rebooting. "You'll have to speak with Mr. Grayson's assistant," she said. "Do you have an appointment?" "Not yet," I said, "but I'm flexible. Mr. Grayson's schedule isn't." It worked. 5 minutes later, we were in a glass-walled office the size of Wolfe's library, though not half as comfortable. The assistant, lean, blonde, sharp, entered with a tablet and a suspicion that could peel paint. "Mr. Grayson is unavailable," she said. "I can answer questions within limits." "Great," I said. "We love limits. Keeps life interesting." I asked routine nonsense about solvent storage, incident logs, and inspection records while Saul quietly moved toward a shelf lined with sample jars. The assistant's eyes followed him like a hawk, which was exactly what I wanted. That's when I saw it. The photo on her desk. A team group shot, 8 people in lab coats. One of them, standing slightly apart, was Merriweather. I pointed. "He yours?" Her expression didn't flicker. "Formally. Contract terminated last week." "Voluntary termination?" I wasn't informed of the details. "Where'd he go?" She folded her arms. "Is this relevant to chemical safety, Mr. Goodwin?" "Depends," I said. "If he's dead, it's more relevant than you think." For the first time, she blinked too fast. Saul caught it too. "We'd like to see his workspace," he said. "That's not possible." "Everything's possible," I said, smiling. "Some things are just expensive." She hesitated, then sighed and led us down a corridor lined with steel doors. Merriweather's lab was the third on the right. She unlocked it reluctantly. Inside, the place smelled faintly of alcohol and something metallic. Notes littered the table. Equations, graphs, chemical diagrams. Saul crouched beside the waste bin and lifted a half-burned folder with tweezers. "Somebody didn't want this read," he murmured. I looked over his shoulder. What was left of the title page read, "Project Bastion, Protective Shelling Variants." The signature at the bottom wasn't Merriweather's. It was Lang Henway's. Saul gave a low whistle. "Looks like both sides were in bed before the fight started." The assistant's voice cut in sharply. "You're not authorized to remove anything from this lab." "Relax," I said, pocketing the fragment. "We're just protecting the shell." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't stop us. That told me she knew more than she'd say. Back at the car, Saul lit a cigarette and stared out at the building. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Probably," I said. That Grayson and Henway were working together on the coating process, maybe even testing it across both labs. Merriweather finds out, decides to blow the whistle, or they make sure he doesn't. And sending the egg to Wolfe? That's the part I can't figure. Maybe it was insurance. If anything happened, Wolfe would start digging. Or maybe someone wanted to drag him into it to keep the attention off themselves. Saul flicked ash out the window. You think Mina knows? She doesn't strike me as the Machiavelli type, but Henway, he's too quiet in all this. Wolfe's right. The man's hiding something. Tomorrow's meeting should be lively. When I got back to the brownstone, the lights in Wolfe's office were low, and he was reading with the kind of intensity most men reserve for wills. The egg towel was gone, and the desk gleamed like a crime scene scrubbed by angels. He looked up as I came in. Report. I gave it to him straight. The Grayson visit, the assistant, the photo, the burned notes, the joint signature. He listened, immovable, except for one small twitch at the corner of his mouth when I mentioned Project Bastion. So, he said, they cooperated, then quarreled. Typical. And you have confirmed that Merriweather's hand was in neither final product nor its dissemination. Looks that way, I said. If he was the whistleblower, someone decided to close his mouth permanently. Wolfe set his book aside. Then tomorrow, we shall close another. He called Fritz for beer and waited until the glass was in his hand, before continuing. Mr. Henway will come here, not I to him. You will inform Ms. Collier to convey this correction. If he refuses, he will discover that his company's patent filings are about to become public entertainment. You may hint that the Gazette has a copy. I grinned, which of course it doesn't. Not yet, Wolfe said, but Mr. Cohen will oblige us. I left him to his beer and went to make the call. Mina answered after one ring, sounding more composed. I gave her Wolfe's message, word for word. She didn't argue, just said, he'll come. He always comes when reputation's on the line. When I hung up, Wolfe was staring out the window, his reflection merging with the city lights. Archie, he said without turning, our adversary is clever, but cleverness without discipline is self-destructive. Whoever sent that egg believes intellect is invulnerable. I slipped my notebook into my pocket. You planning to prove them wrong? He nodded once. Tomorrow, Archie, we will break something far harder than a shell. By the following morning, the brownstone felt like it was holding its breath. Even Fritz, who usually managed breakfast with the serenity of a Swiss monastery, was rattling pans harder than usual. Wolfe didn't appear for eggs, thank heaven, but for once skipped both orchids and routine. That's when I knew we were heading for something serious. When Nero Wolfe rearranges his sacred schedule, the world should check its insurance. At 11:30 sharp, the doorbell announced Lang Henway. I opened it to find a man who looked more like a banker than a scientist. Silver hair, tailored suit, expression carved from polished arrogance. He had the kind of posture that comes from spending a lifetime mistaking fear for respect. Mina Collier followed him in, paler than she'd been yesterday, but steady. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He rarely wasted the calories. He sat behind his desk, hands folded, eyes half closed in that infuriating way that made grown men feel like small boys caught lying about homework. I handled the introductions, then stepped aside while Wolfe gestured to the red leather chair. Mr. Henway, he said, in that deep rumble that managed to sound both courteous and damning. Your arrival is a concession to reason. I appreciate that. Henway smiled thinly. Miss Collier said you were insistent. I prefer to resolve misunderstandings quickly. I gather this is about that absurd business with the egg. Wolfe's lids lifted a fraction. Absurdity, he said, is a word most often employed by men attempting to escape its opposite, culpability. Henway's smile faded. I beg your pardon? You need not, Wolfe said. You were aware that one of your employees, Dr. Merriweather, was in contact with Grayson Industrial Chemicals. Henway's face twitched. I was aware of nothing of the kind. I took the burned folder fragment from my pocket and placed it on the desk. Wolfe nudged it forward with one finger. You may recognize your own signature. The color drained from Henway's cheeks faster than a whiskey bottle at closing time. Mina shifted in her seat, watching him. That, he said tightly, was part of a discontinued joint venture. Experimental coatings, harmless. Grayson was our contractor for preliminary testing. There was no impropriety. No impropriety, Wolfe repeated. Then the altered sample that produced methyl cyanide was simply a coincidence. One that killed your associate and nearly asphyxiated me. That hit him like a whip. He rose halfway from his seat. Killed? Merriweather is dead? Presumed so, I said. He left a farewell note and enough chemical residue to make an undertaker nervous. Henway sank back. Good Lord. I didn't know. He'd been unstable lately, rambling about sabotage, claiming someone was stealing his research. Someone was, Wolfe said softly, and you were paying for it. Mina turned sharply. Mr. Wolfe, if you think Mr. Henway ordered... Pfui, Wolfe said. I think Mr. Henway allowed it. There is a distinction. He did not send the poison specimen to this house. He lacks the imagination. Henway stiffened, but Wolfe continued. However, one of his employees, one of your colleagues, Ms. Collier, did. Not from malice toward me, but to manipulate fear, to create a crisis that would bury the truth of Grayson's involvement. Mina's lips parted. That's impossible. Is it? Wolfe's eyes opened fully now, heavy and unblinking. You told me yesterday that 4 individuals had access to your formula. Malik Patel, May Drury, Mel Haskins, and Dr. Merriweather. 3 are alive. 1 is dead. Mr. Patel's after-hours sessions indicate data deletion, not dissemination. Ms. Drury is too vain to soil her manicure with beakers. Mr. Haskins, however, he has proximity, incentive, and family connection to Grayson Industrial's board. Henway's head snapped toward her. Haskins, that idiot! I told HR not to hire him. Indeed, Wolfe said. But you did, and he repaid you by weaponizing your work. He took Merriweather's stabilized compound, re-engineered it into a reactive shell, and used it as proof of concept for Grayson's defense contract proposal. A protective shelling agent, yes? He then needed to eliminate Merriweather, who had begun suspecting the truth. Mina was staring at him, horror dawning. You mean Haskins killed him? I mean, Wolfe said, Haskins made it necessary for Merriweather to die. The rest was merely chemistry. I leaned forward. Then the egg. An insurance, Wolfe said. Merriweather, fearing exposure or retaliation, sent a sample to me anonymously, hoping I would unravel its origin. He assumed I would test, not crack. When Haskins discovered this, he ensured the sample was lethal, knowing I would become both his scapegoat and his victim. Henway's hands trembled on the armrest. This is monstrous. If what you say is true, I'll have him arrested. Not yet, Wolfe said. He will come here first. Mina blinked. Here? Why would he? Wolfe turned to me. Archie, you will telephone him. Tell him Ms. Collier and Mr. Henway are conferring with me privately. Say that I've identified the individual responsible for the sabotage and that I wish to give him a chance to speak before I inform the police. He will not resist curiosity. I nodded, picking up the receiver. Haskins answered on the second ring, sounding smug. When I relayed Wolfe's message, the pause on the line was short, then a forced laugh. Sure, why not? Always wanted to meet the great Nero Wolfe. He promised to be there in 30 minutes. When I hung up, Wolfe was silent, his eyes fixed on nothing, or maybe everything. Henway sat rigid, guilt and pride warring on his face. Mina twisted her gloves in her lap. Wolfe finally spoke. Archie, remove the towel from the waste bin. I obeyed, pulling it free. The egg, what remained of it, was now a dull, collapsed husk, brittle as paper. Wolfe looked at it with something close to pity. That, he said, is the sum of all vanity. A shell hardened beyond endurance until it destroys what it was meant to protect. He glanced at the clock. When Mr. Haskins arrives, Archie, he will deny everything. Let him. The truth will emerge without my effort. And when it does, he folded his hands and leaned back. Justice, as always, will hatch itself. The bell rang 25 minutes later. I went to the door. Mel Haskins was right on time with a grin that belonged to a man who believed in his own cleverness. He stepped inside, looking from me to Mina, to Henway, and finally to Wolfe. "Well," he said, "this looks cozy. Which one of you cracked first?" "None of us," I said, closing the door behind him. "But you might want to sit down. Mr. Wolfe's about to make an omelette." Mel Haskins didn't sit. He lounged, and that's a different animal. He draped himself across the red leather chair like he owned the place, crossing one leg over the other, wearing a grin that could have sold fake gold. His eyes flicked around the room, cataloguing faces. Mina looked brittle, Henway looked furious, and Wolfe looked like a man studying a species he might exterminate later if time allowed. "Well, this is flattering," Haskins said. "All the smart people in one room. And me. So what's the occasion?" Miss Collier finally figured out how to make eggs explode? "Sit properly," Wolfe said. It wasn't loud, but it landed like a judge's gavel. Haskins straightened by instinct before realizing he'd done it. Wolfe's voice does that to people. It's not a sound, it's a verdict. "You received my message," Wolfe continued. "You understand why you're here. I understand you think I've done something worth discussing. So, discuss." "Very well. You were employed by Henway Labs for 6 months. Your credentials were adequate, your initiative questionable, and your loyalty non-existent. Compliments already?" Haskins leaned back again. "You read my file?" "I read your work," Wolfe said. "You introduced instability into a stabilized lattice compound. You then supplied a variant to Grayson Industrial through a secondary channel. Your cousin, I believe, Mr. Preston Haskins, who handles acquisitions there." Mel's grin dimmed a fraction. "That's a cute theory. You have proof?" "I have inference," Wolfe said, "which in my hands is more dangerous. The stolen notes from Dr. Merriweather's lab were destroyed with chemical accelerant. Your method. The counterfeit sample sent to me was coated with your formulation, not his. Your mistake was arrogance. You modified the lattice ratio by 0.03, enough to strengthen the shell, but the signature pattern of calcium dispersion remained yours. I recognized it." Haskins laughed, but it was too quick, too loud. "You recognized it. From what? One egg?" "Yes," Wolfe said, and let the word hang in the air until the laughter wilted. "From one egg." Henway made a strangled sound, half disbelief, half anger. "Haskins, you fool. You've destroyed us." "I've improved you," Haskins snapped. "That formula was revolutionary. If Grayson had bought it outright, we'd all be rich. But no. You wanted exclusivity. You wanted control. Merriweather was going to expose you for patent manipulation, and Collier here would have followed him. So yes, I gave Grayson something they couldn't refuse. And you'd never have known if the fat man hadn't sniffed it out." I moved before he could finish the insult, but Wolfe stopped me with one word. "Archie." His tone was calm, but it had an undertow. I froze where I was. "You admit," Wolfe said, "to transferring proprietary data to a competitor." "I admit to making science work," Haskins said. "What you call theft, I call progress. Merriweather was already dead inside. He just didn't know it yet." Mina stood up, trembling but clear-voiced. "You killed him," Haskins sneered. "He killed himself. I just gave him the reason." "That," Wolfe said, "is sophistry. You manipulated him into testing a compound you'd corrupted, knowing its instability. When he realized it could kill, he tried to warn someone. Me. You intercepted the sample, reinforced it further, and ensured it would release gas when cracked. You counted on my curiosity. Fortunately for me, You overestimated your own subtlety. Haskins turned toward the door, the grin back but shaky. You can't prove a word of that. Perhaps not, Wolfe said, but Saul Panzer can. On cue, the front door opened, and Saul stepped in with his usual quiet precision. He held a small plastic evidence bag. Got what you wanted, Mr. Wolfe. He handed it over. Inside was a thumb drive, marked with the Grayson logo. Wolfe didn't touch it. He gestured for me to take it instead. Mr. Panzer retrieved this from the Grayson servers early this morning, Wolfe said. It contains every transfer log from your cousin's department, including encrypted files labeled Bastion Revision H. Your initials are attached to the submission metadata. I presume the H is for Haskins. Mel's face drained, the grin snapping like a cheap mask. That's a lie. Then you will be pleased, Wolfe said, to explain it to Inspector Kramer when he arrives. Henway surged to his feet. Kramer, you called the police? Of course, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin informed them 15 minutes ago. Right on schedule, the bell rang. I went to let Kramer in. He entered with the scent of tobacco and suspicion, looked around the room, and saw the tension coiling like a spring. All right, Wolfe, he said. What circus have you built this time? A brief one, Wolfe said. That young man, Mr. Haskins, is responsible for the death of Dr. Merriweather and the attempted poisoning of this household. Kramer looked at me, and I nodded. He turned to Haskins. That true? Haskins' jaw worked, but nothing came out. Kramer moved forward, handcuffs ready. You're coming with me. Haskins' control broke. You can't arrest me on that lunatic's say-so? Lunatic? Wolfe echoed. That egg nearly killed me, Mr. Haskins. I assure you my lunacy has limits. Kramer signaled one of his men, and the cuffs clicked home. Mina exhaled shakily, as if the air itself had been poisoned until that moment. Henway sat with his head in his hands, muttering about lawyers and reputations. When they'd gone, Wolfe reached for his beer. Archie, he said quietly. The moral, as always. No structure, however elegant, can endure corruption. Once the foundation cracks, collapse is inevitable. I nodded. That's a nice way to say you are right. He sipped, eyes closing with faint satisfaction. I'm always right. The tragedy lies in how seldom it helps anyone. He leaned back, exhaled, and let the silence return. I thought it was over until he added, almost absently, Remind Fritz that tomorrow we may resume eggs for breakfast, preferably ones that break. Kramer left with Haskins in tow, the front door shutting behind them like the period at the end of a long, ugly sentence. The room stayed still for a while. Mina Collier sat motionless in the red chair, her gloved hands clasped in her lap as if they'd been glued there. Henway hadn't moved either, except to wipe his forehead with a silk handkerchief that probably cost more than Fritz's monthly grocery bill. Wolfe, meanwhile, was silent. Not from exhaustion, but from thought. When Nero Wolfe went quiet after a storm, it wasn't peace, it was aftermath. I busied myself pouring him a fresh glass of beer. When I handed it over, he took it without looking up, his thumb tracing the condensation on the glass the way another man might stroke a wound. Archie, he said at last, you will take Miss Collier home. Mina stirred. Mr. Wolfe, He cut her off gently. You will go home, Miss Collier. Rest. The strain of guilt and survival weighs heavily when mixed. I will call you tomorrow to settle your contract. She blinked, startled. My contract? Indeed, he said. You engaged me to resolve a crisis. It is resolved. Her voice softened. And if it hadn't been, then you would not be here to ask, he replied. I took her coat and led her to the door. Outside, the autumn air had turned colder, sharp enough to bite. She walked beside me down the steps, the night wind tugging a loose strand of her dark hair. I thought I knew those people, she said quietly. I thought science was clean work. Equations, results, progress. But it's all just ambition, isn't it? I handed her into the cab. Science doesn't make people dirty, I said. People make science dirty when they forget to wash their motives. That got a faint smile, the kind that lasts only a heartbeat. You and Mr. Wolfe make a strange pair, she said. You don't know the half of it, I said. Good night, Miss Collier. Back inside, the brownstone felt warm again, but the comfort hadn't quite returned. Wolfe was where I left him, still in the chair, eyes closed but awake. His voice drifted toward me as I crossed the room. You have conveyed her safely. Cab on Lexington, I said. She looked more shaken than guilty. She will recover, Wolfe said. Guilt can be mended by innocence. It is pride that resists treatment. Henway was still standing by the desk, staring at nothing in particular. His hands hung limp at his sides, his authority leaking out like steam from a cracked pipe. I'll need to salvage what I can, he said quietly. My board will tear me apart. They should, Wolfe said without sympathy. You allowed your enterprise to become an instrument of deceit. You permitted vanity to dictate association. You trusted a surname instead of a conscience. Henway looked up sharply. You speak as though I deserve punishment. You do, Wolfe said, not for what you did, but for what you neglected to prevent. There is no virtue in ignorance, Mr. Henway, only convenience. I was about to step in before Henway could splutter out something regrettable. But he surprised me. He just nodded once, heavy and slow. I suppose you're right, he said. If I'd had your instincts, you would have squandered them, Wolfe said. Good night. Henway took the dismissal like a man swallowing stones. When the door closed behind him, the room finally exhaled. I went to the window, watching the headlights roll away into the dark. You know, for a case that started with an egg, it ended up rotten clear through. That was apparent from the beginning, Wolfe said. Any object too durable invites suspicion. Nature demands frailty. Perfection is a fraud. It conceals rot beneath its polish. Poetic, I said. But if you start writing verse about omelets, I'm quitting. He grunted, which I took as affection. Then his eyes flicked toward the desk, where the shriveled remains of the egg still lay on the blotter like a warning. Dispose of it, he said. Carefully. Sure, I said. Should I give it a funeral? If you must, he muttered. Fritz appeared then, cautious as a man checking a minefield. Is it finished? He asked. Yes, Wolfe said. You may resume your culinary ambitions tomorrow. Fritz beamed with relief. Then I shall prepare breakfast properly again. No more dangerous eggs. He shot the remains a venomous glance and retreated. When he was gone, I sat down opposite Wolfe. So what happens to Mina? She will leave Henway Labs, Wolfe said. Perhaps she will start anew. Perhaps she will marry. Perhaps she will write a book denouncing men like Henway. It is immaterial. She will survive, and that is sufficient. And you? I asked. You almost inhaled poison this week. That's not your usual routine. He gave me a long, steady look. A reminder, Archie. My work depends on intellect, not immunity. Even the most careful mind can be deceived by curiosity. I leaned back. Then I suppose you'll be giving up detective work. Pfui, he said with real irritation. Do not be inane. That broke the tension. I laughed, and even he allowed the corner of his mouth to rise. By Wolfe's standards, that's a celebration. The clock chimed midnight. Wolfe reached for his beer, took a final sip, and set it down with ceremony. We are done, he said. The egg was the symbol, the man was the flaw, and the crime was the consequence. All as it should be. I stood, stretching. Then it's over. For now, he said, until the next act of human folly forces me to perform again. He closed his eyes, sinking into his chair, and I turned off the lamp. The office fell into soft amber shadow, the air thick with the smell of old books and beer and the faint, lingering trace of danger. As I went upstairs, I could still hear him murmuring to himself, a quiet echo under the hum of the city. The shell holds, but only for so long. And that was that. The brownstone was safe again, the world outside still full of people too clever for their own good. Wolfe would rest, orchids would bloom, and breakfast tomorrow would finally, mercifully, break. I slept like a man who'd spent the day dodging poison and police statements, which wasn't far off. When I woke the next morning, the brownstone had its rhythm back. Fritz humming faintly in the kitchen, the faint hiss of water pipes and the smell of coffee that could make a corpse reconsider retirement. Wolfe was already at breakfast when I came down, which told me the orchids had been postponed again. That only happened when something was still gnawing at his brain and I had a hunch what it was. "Good morning," I said, sliding into my chair. "You look less like a victim and more like yourself. I take it death has decided to reschedule?" "Your facetiousness," he murmured, buttering his toast, "is as tiresome as it is predictable." "Sit down. We are not finished." That put the brakes on my appetite faster than cyanide. Not finished? I thought Haskins' confession wrapped the bow. "It wrapped a bow," he said. "It did not secure the knot." He laid his knife precisely across his plate. "A confession made under pressure satisfies police, not truth. I do not rest on half measures." I leaned back. "Then what's left?" He regarded me with mild disapproval, the kind he usually reserves for unsalted soup. "Haskins admitted to sabotage and manslaughter, yes. But tell me, Archie, why send the egg here? To me? Why take the risk?" "Because he was overconfident," I said. "He wanted to humiliate the man most likely to expose him." Wolfe shook his head. "That is plausible, not sufficient. Overconfidence drives men to folly, not precision. The delivery was timed perfectly, the note cryptic yet deliberate, the formula altered just enough to weaponize without immediate detection. Haskins lacked that finesse." I raised an eyebrow. "You're saying someone else cooked the omelet?" "Precisely." He dabbed his mouth with his napkin. "The man is a fool, Archie, but not a chemist of genius. He could not have achieved that result without assistance." I felt a chill of professional irritation, the kind you get when you realize the case you closed last night just reopened itself. "Then who?" He leaned back, eyes half-lidded. "You will return to Henway Labs. Speak to Ms. Collier and Mr. Patel. Observe what they do not say." That's how I found myself back at Henway by 11, standing in the lobby where everyone avoided eye contact like guilt was contagious. The company was already hemorrhaging morale. Haskins' arrest had gone public overnight, and word spread faster than coffee stains. Mina met me by the elevator, pale but composed, clipboard in hand like it was a shield. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. "Mr. Wolfe sent you?" "More like loaned me. He wants to tie a few loose ends before he sleeps again." She sighed. "We're all tying loose ends here." She led me into the lab, quieter now, stripped of its usual hum of self-importance. Malik Patel was there, sleeves rolled up, face drawn tight as a bowstring. When he saw me, he didn't bother hiding his resentment. "Back again, Mr. Goodwin. Haven't you done enough?" "Depends who you ask," I said. "Wolfe thinks there's still a thread dangling. Mind if I give it a tug?" "I mind," he snapped. "I have reports to finish before the board meeting." "Then you'll forgive me if I multitask," I said, stepping closer to his workstation. On it were several sealed vials and a notebook filled with dense formulas. "You worked with Haskins, didn't you?" "I worked near him," Patel said. "That's different." "Not that different," I said. "You stayed late some nights. He stayed late too. You were both deleting data." He froze, just for a second, and that was enough. I'd seen crooks bluff better with fewer tells. I was cleaning obsolete results, he said, a beat too slow. Sure you were, I said. And those obsolete results just happened to be from Merryweather's trials. What did you really delete? He turned toward me, jaw tight. You don't understand. The process. We thought it could stabilize delicate compounds. It did more than that. It could preserve any material indefinitely. You see the potential? Food, medical supplies. Nothing would spoil. His voice trembled. Half pride, half fear. It wasn't meant for profit. But Henway saw it differently. And Haskins? I asked. He laughed bitterly. Haskins only saw his cousin's bank account. But he didn't invent it. Merryweather didn't either. My pulse ticked faster. Then who did? Patel hesitated, then glanced at Mina. She shook her head slightly, but he ignored her. It was May Drury, he said. She wasn't just PR. She studied biochemistry at Columbia. She refined the lattice. She realized it could trap gas molecules inside a shell. She told Haskins it could revolutionize preservation. He twisted it into a weapon. I whistled low. So the Eggs Poison Act was her brainchild? She didn't know what he'd done, Patel said quickly. But she hid her involvement afterward. Said she'd never worked in the lab, that it was all Merryweather and Haskins. Mina looked stricken. May, she's been coordinating with the press. She's the one defending Henway's name. Convenient, I said. She's also the one controlling the story. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was already expecting me, which either meant he'd divined the truth or Fritz had bugged my hat. May Drury, he said before I opened my mouth. You knew? I suspected, he said. Her behavior was conspicuous by absence. A woman in her position thrives on visibility, yet she avoided confrontation. The guilty seldom run. They recede. I filled him in on Patel's confession. Wolfe listened, eyes closed, head tilted slightly, absorbing each detail like a radio signal. When I finished, he exhaled deeply. She will visit, he said. This evening, perhaps sooner. When cornered, the clever reveal themselves not by denial, but by eloquence. He was right. At 7:30. The bell rang. I opened the door to find May Drury herself, impeccable as always, hair smooth, smile sharper than any lab instrument. Mr. Wolfe, she said as I led her in. I thought it best to clarify a few points before the newspapers do. Splendid, Wolfe said. Do sit down. We may yet prevent another tragedy of ego. She did sit, but gracefully, like a queen humoring her court. If you're referring to Haskins' accident, I assure you I had nothing to do with it. Wolfe smiled faintly. Accidents are seldom so symmetrical. I'm referring to the matter of authorship. You designed the compound, Ms. Drury. You allowed it to be misused, then sought to erase your fingerprints. Her composure flickered, just once. You can't prove that. Proof, Wolfe said, is for the police. I'm content with understanding. You desired recognition without risk. You let others wield your intellect until they shattered it. That egg on my desk was not only Haskins' sin. It was your vanity made manifest. She rose abruptly, color flooding her cheeks. You have no idea what it's like to be dismissed, to have your work stolen because you're a woman in a room full of egos. On the contrary, Wolfe said quietly. I understand completely, but intellect, misused, poisons more than air. It poisons purpose. And you, Ms. Drury, will now live with the stench. She stood frozen, breathing hard, then turned sharply and left without another word. When the door closed, Wolfe reached for his beer. Archie, he said, inform Inspector Kramer. He'll want to know that the lady behind the headlines is the one who wrote the formula. I nodded slowly. And what about you? I, he said, leaning back, am finished. The shell has broken, the yolk spilled, and the lesson, sadly, is eternal. He took a long sip, sighed and closed his eyes. Now Fritz may serve dinner. Dinner that night was quieter than usual. Fritz had gone all out. Veal in cream sauce, fresh asparagus, the sort of meal that usually earned at least a grunt of approval from Wolfe, but the big man barely touched his plate. He sat in that immense chair at the head of the table, fork motionless, eyes somewhere far away, as though watching thoughts drift through a fog. It wasn't guilt, of course. Nero Wolfe didn't do guilt. It was something else, an aftertaste of dissatisfaction, the kind that comes when the mind knows there's one more card hidden in the deck. I didn't interrupt him. I've learned over the years that when Wolfe is silent during dinner, it isn't because he's enjoying it. It's because he's dissecting something invisible. So I kept my own plate clean, poured us both coffee, and waited for the inevitable. It came when he set down his cup and muttered, "Unsatisfactory." I looked up. "The sauce? I thought it was top tier." He shot me a glance of deep annoyance. "Not the sauce, Archie. The resolution? It is incomplete." "You mean Drury?" He leaned back, fingers interlaced on his stomach. "Kramer has her in custody, yes. The evidence is damning, her admissions sufficient, her motives predictable. Yet I am uneasy. There remains an element unaccounted for." "Such as?" "The egg," he said softly. "Not the symbol, the object. The container that carried death into this house. How precisely did it arrive?" I frowned. Through the morning delivery. The same carton Fritz picked up from the doorstep. Indeed. But who delivered it? The usual milk company. Riverside Dairies. Fritz signs every Tuesday. Phooey. He tapped the table sharply. He did not sign that morning. I blinked. He didn't? He told me so when I asked after the first incident. The carton was left at the door, no signature required. He assumed it was routine. Wolfe's tone hardened. "I do not assume." He rose then, a sight as rare as a lunar eclipse, and moved toward the office. "We are not finished. Retrieve the invoice records from Fritz, and Archie, telephone Saul. Have him check the Riverside route. I want the driver." By midnight, Saul had called back. "You're going to love this," he said over the line. The regular driver, Tom Phelps, took that day off. Temporary replacement handled the delivery, a man no one at the depot remembers hiring. "Description?" I asked. "Tall, grey coat, cap pulled low. Used a Riverside truck, clean papers, vanished by noon. No trace since." I thanked him and hung up. Wolfe, who'd been listening from his chair, let out a slow exhale. "There," he said. "The missing card. You think Drury didn't send it?" "She designed it, yes. But the hand that delivered it belonged to someone else." He closed his eyes. "Archie, I dislike coincidences. And I dislike ghosts even more. Merriweather's disappearance, his supposed death, and a delivery man who leaves no record, these do not coexist without purpose. We have been deceived." That statement landed heavy. I watched him for a moment, then said quietly, "You think Merriweather's alive?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that he never intended to die. He staged it using his own creation to vanish. Haskins believed he killed him. Drury believed she buried him. Both were wrong." I whistled softly. "That's a neat trick, using poison gas to fake your own death." "Not poison," Wolfe said. "Gas harmless in trace quantity, fatal only in confinement. He would have known how to control exposure. The residue found in his lab could have been residue from dispersion, not decay." I grinned. "So where is he now? Hiding under a new name, waiting for the smoke to clear?" "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "Or perhaps he has been hiding in plain sight." He opened his eyes and fixed them on me. "Tomorrow you will visit Grayson Industrial again. See if they have acquired any new consultants. If Merriweather is alive, that is where he will have gone." The man was brilliant but vain. He could not resist watching his work survive. The next morning, I found myself once again in the glass fortress of Grayson Industrial. This time, the receptionist didn't even bother pretending to like me. "Appointments only," she said. "I'm not selling encyclopedias," I told her. "I'm here to talk to whoever handles your research acquisitions." She eyed me like I was gum on the lobby floor, but a name drop of Wolfe's had the desired effect. 10 minutes later, I was in a smaller office at the back, waiting for the company's new consultant. When the door opened, I nearly forgot to breathe. Merriweather stood there, alive, thinner, paler, and sporting a beard that looked grown for camouflage, not fashion. His eyes flicked to me and narrowed. "Mr. Goodwin," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," I said. "You're supposed to be dead." He gave a faint smile. "A technical oversight." I leaned back. "You sent the egg." He didn't deny it. "Yes, I had to. I knew Wolfe would see the pattern. He's the only one who could. I never meant for it to harm him, only to force exposure. Haskins, Drury, Henway, they were all using my research for greed. I had to destroy it before they sold it to the government. So I vanished." "By staging your own death," I said. "A little melodramatic, don't you think?" "Necessary," he replied, voice calm. "And I might have stayed dead if Drury hadn't tampered with the formula. She made it volatile. My warning reached Wolfe before I could." I whistled low. "So you're the architect, not the villain." He shook his head. "I'm both. Intentions don't absolve consequences. Tell Wolfe I'm leaving the country tonight. He'll understand." "He'll understand, all right," I said. "But don't expect applause." He gave a small, weary nod and left through a back door before I could stop him. By the time Saul and I returned that evening, he was gone. Passport fraud, empty apartment, no trail. Just like that, the ghost slipped the leash. When I told Wolfe, he didn't seem surprised. "As expected," he said. "He has chosen exile over judgment. I will not pursue him." "You could," I said. "Kramer would." "Kramer is paid to chase guilt," Wolfe said. "I am paid to understand it." He leaned back, eyes half closed, voice low and heavy as thunder before rain. "The world is full of men who break what they cannot comprehend. Merriweather merely broke himself first." I said nothing. There wasn't anything left to add. The case was over, if you could call it that. The guilty were punished, the living scarred, and the egg, the cursed, unbreakable egg, was gone for good. As I switched off the lamp and headed upstairs, I heard Wolfe mutter to himself, almost tenderly, "The egg that wouldn't break. Because truth, Archie, is always harder than its shell." And in the brownstone where silence had finally returned, that truth held. Kramer showed up at the brownstone 2 days later, looking like a man who'd bitten into something sour and realized it was justice. He dropped his hat on the rack and didn't wait for Fritz's polite greeting. When Kramer comes without his cigar, you know the case has been grinding his nerves like gravel. "Wolfe," he said, storming into the office, "you couldn't let the cops have one clean ending, could you? You had to make it philosophical." Wolfe didn't rise from his chair. He was behind his desk, hands folded across his vest, eyes half-lidded. He looked, as usual, like a mountain pretending to nap. "If you are referring to Mr. Merriweather," he said, "I've already informed you he is beyond your jurisdiction." "Beyond?" "He faked his death, ran with classified data, and walked out of the country," Kramer barked. "You call that beyond?" "I call it," Wolfe said, "irrevocable." Kramer snorted. "You're lucky we can't prove you knew sooner." "Luck," Wolfe murmured, "has nothing to do with it. My silence ensured no further deaths. Mr. Merriweather's departure, though regrettable, concluded the matter with less waste than your men chasing phantoms." Kramer muttered something that wasn't printable, gave me a look that could have peeled varnish, and left the way he came. The sound of the door slamming had barely faded before Wolfe reached for his beer. Do you ever get tired of being right? I asked. He took a slow sip and set the glass down. No. That, right there, was my employer in a nutshell. He'd outmaneuvered everyone again. Police, scientists, corporate brass, even death itself. The case was closed on paper, but Wolfe wasn't the type to celebrate. He didn't savor victory. He digested it. Archie, he said after a moment, record the final notes. The file shall be titled, The Egg That Wouldn't Break. Already started, I said, tapping my notebook. You want the moral in the record too, or just the facts? The facts are trivial, he said. The moral is mandatory. I waited. Wolfe leaned back, eyes fixed on nothing. A creation meant to preserve became an instrument of destruction. The flaw was not in science, but in vanity. Men strive to make things unbreakable. Shells, reputations, empires. In doing so, they forget that resilience without conscience is merely resistance. That'll look great framed over the kitchen stove, I said. Fritz will love it. He grunted. Fritz will never allow an egg in this house again. That drew my first laugh in days. Wolfe didn't join in, of course. Humor is one delicacy he appreciates, but never consumes. Later, when Fritz brought the evening beer and the office had settled into its usual rhythm, the ticking clock, the faint smell of orchids from upstairs, the rustle of newspaper pages, I found myself thinking back over the past week. The poison, the lies, the shells that hid everything from pride to guilt. It had all come apart because one man refused to believe in limits. Wolfe spoke again, softer this time. You're wondering if Merriweather deserved to live. Something like that. He nodded. He was not innocent, Archie. But he was aware. Awareness, at least, is the first step toward atonement. It is a path most men never find. Think he'll walk it? That, Wolfe said, closing his eyes, is not my concern. My duty ends at comprehension. I didn't argue. Some men chase criminals. Wolfe dissects them. The rest of us just try to keep up. By the time the clock struck 10, the city outside was humming again, pretending nothing had happened. I rose, switched off the desk lamp, and glanced back. Wolfe was already motionless, chin tucked, lost somewhere deep in that formidable labyrinth of a mind. The egg that wouldn't break, I said aloud, just to hear it once more. You think there's ever one that does? His answer came without opening his eyes. Every shell breaks, Archie. Only the timing differs. And that was Nero Wolfe's version of peace. A truth spoken like a benediction, a beer at his elbow, and the world finally quiet again. I turned out the light and left him there, the master of stillness in a house where no sound could trespass without reason. The brownstone slept easy that night. Dinner would resume, orchids would bloom, and the world, cracked or not, would keep spinning. End of Nero Wolfe and the egg that wouldn't break. That 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 break.